The sky cracked open with a silent, unnatural shimmer. One moment, the world was bathed in the familiar hum of city life, car horns blaring, people chattering, the distant echo of machinery churning. The next, there was silence. Not just any silence, but an eerie, oppressive vacuum, as if the universe itself had taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. Above Earth, the arrival had begun. Massive, obsidian-black structures descended from the heavens, blotting out the sun. They didn't roar. They didn't shimmer with light or pulse with energy. They simply arrived, defying gravity, drifting down like leaves on an invisible wind. The largest hovered ominously over Washington, D.C., casting a shadow so vast it turned midday into twilight. Others positioned themselves over major cities: Moscow, Beijing, London, Tokyo, Johannesburg. And still, there was no sound. Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Hayes stood at the edge of the Pentagon's war room, staring at the live satellite feed. It made no sense. Alien ships had arrived, but there were no broadcasts, no threats, no demands, no electromagnetic signals of any kind. Even radio waves seemed to vanish into the void around them. "Any response?" General Peterson's voice was gruff, clipped but laced with tension. "Nothing, sir," came the reply from a communications officer. "No signals, no movement. They're just there." That was the terrifying part. They weren't attacking, weren't speaking, weren't acknowledging anything. The ships had simply appeared, massive and indifferent. It was as if humanity had been put under a microscope, a specimen being observed. Then, as if to confirm that chilling thought, people started falling. It began subtly. Passers-by in Times Square simply dropping mid-stride. A mother pushing a stroller crumpling like a puppet with severed strings. A businessman adjusting his tie and then face-planting onto the pavement. Across the world, it spread like a ripple, like a silent, unseen wave sweeping through the most populated areas. No screams, no struggle, just collapse. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered in the war room. Hayes felt his pulse hammering as he watched the numbers climb on the live death counter. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. "Are they targeting specific people?" Peterson barked. "No pattern, sir," an analyst said, voice shaking. "It's random. Old, young, rich, poor, anyone." "Except us," Hayes muttered. The war room fell into a heavy silence as the realization settled in. The Pentagon, along with every military base, was unaffected. Remote locations, underground bunkers, ships at sea. Everyone still stood, breathing, heartbeats steady. It wasn't just an attack. It was selection. And for the first time in human history, the enemy hadn't come with weapons. They had come with silence. But humanity wasn't going to go down without a fight. Panic spread like wildfire, but there was no enemy to fight, no voice to plead with. The streets of major cities were littered with bodies, unmoving, untouched. The world had fallen into a quiet, suffocating horror. At the Pentagon, the silence in the war room was broken only by the frantic keystrokes of intelligence officers and the occasional hushed curse. No one could process what was happening. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't radiation. It wasn't a weapon they could see. "We have to retaliate," General Peterson said, jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. "If they're selecting who lives and who dies, we need to show them we won't just stand by." "Retaliate with what?" Hayes asked, shaking his head. "We can't even detect them. We can't communicate with them. We don't know how they're doing this." "I don't care," Peterson snapped. "We have nukes, we have orbital weapons. We hit them with everything we've got." Hayes hesitated. Something felt wrong. This wasn't a standard invasion. There were no explosions, no battleships opening fire. The aliens weren't even engaging with their weapons. They had come in silence, killed in silence, and now they were waiting. What were they waiting for? "Sir," a trembling voice called from the intelligence station. "We've got something on the satellites." The screen shifted to a high-altitude feed. One of the alien ships hovered over New York City, unmoving, but now something was happening to the ground beneath it. The air rippled, a strange distortion bending the light. Then, in a slow, surreal motion, the bodies began to rise. Not all of them, just some. Some of the fallen lifted into the air like weightless puppets, their limbs hanging limp, their heads lolling to the side. They weren't conscious, they weren't struggling, they simply ascended. "Where the hell are they taking them?" someone murmured. Hayes's gut twisted. It wasn't random. The people who remained on the ground, the ones who weren't taken, were young. Children, a handful of elderly, a few middle-aged civilians. But most of the ones being lifted into the air were between 20 and 50, the prime years of adulthood. "They're taking the strongest," Hayes whispered, the realization dawning like a slow, creeping nightmare. For what? The silence deepened. Then the radios crackled, the first sound since the arrival. A single voice, cold, indifferent. "You are unworthy." The words echoed across every frequency, every channel, every device that could transmit sound. It was everywhere at once, a voice from nowhere and everywhere. The world held its breath. Hayes clenched his fists. "The hell we are," he muttered. And at that moment, he swore humanity would prove them wrong. The silence that followed that message was worse than the message itself. "You are unworthy." The words lingered in the air like an aftershock, digging into the minds of every surviving human. The war room at the Pentagon was frozen. The screens still showed bodies rising into the sky, disappearing into the dark, monolithic alien ships. The rest of the world could only watch in helpless horror. "We need to move, now!" General Peterson barked, snapping everyone out of their trance. "If they think we're unworthy, we show them otherwise. Mobilize every fighter jet, every drone, every missile we have. I want a full assault on those ships before they finish, whatever the hell they're doing." "But what if attacking makes it worse?" someone asked. "Worse?" Peterson spat. "Look at the damn screen. We don't even know if those people are alive." Hayes felt cold. He knew Peterson was right, but something about this still didn't make sense. If the aliens wanted them dead, they could have wiped the planet clean in seconds. But they hadn't. They had chosen. And that terrified him more than a full-scale invasion ever could. "Sir?" a comms officer said, voice tight. "We're detecting activity from the International Space Station." Hayes frowned. "The ISS?" A new screen blinked to life. The station was still in orbit, but its cameras had caught something horrifying. A second wave of ships, smaller, needle-like, were descending from the motherships, not attacking, not bombing, harvesting. The smaller ships extended thin, whip-like tendrils, dragging entire buildings upward. Skyscrapers, vehicles, infrastructure, anything and everything deemed useful was being taken. They weren't just taking people. They were gutting the planet, piece by piece. Hayes gritted his teeth. "This isn't extermination," he said slowly. "It's acquisition." "We're not fighting an army," another analyst whispered. "We're being processed." The room went deathly still. Then the first missile was launched. From an undisclosed military base, an intercontinental ballistic missile streaked toward the ship over Washington, D.C. It hit its target dead center, detonating with enough force to level a city. The shockwave shattered windows, rocked buildings, and sent a fireball stretching into the sky. For a moment, there was hope. And then, the fire dissipated. The ship remained, untouched, unbothered, unmoved. "Oh God," someone muttered. Before anyone could process what had happened, the ship responded. It was instant. It was merciless. From the ship's surface, a pulse of light rippled outward, sweeping across the entire city like a wave of erasure. Wherever it touched, people simply vanished. No scream, no resistance. One moment they existed, and the next, they were gone. The Pentagon's feed cut out. Washington, D.C. had been silenced. The war room erupted into chaos, people shouting, commands overlapping, soldiers gripping their weapons as if that would make a difference. But Hayes barely heard any of it. His mind was racing. This wasn't war. This wasn't conquest. This was judgment. And humanity was failing. But if the aliens thought they were unworthy, then humanity had no choice but to prove them wrong. The world fell into chaos. But it wasn't the chaos of war. It was something worse. Helplessness. For the first time in human history, the enemy wasn't something they could bomb, shoot, or negotiate with. The ships loomed overhead, their presence as indifferent as gods watching from the heavens. Washington, D.C. was gone, wiped from existence in the blink of an eye. The other ships hadn't moved, hadn't retaliated further. They simply continued their quiet harvest, selecting their chosen ones while stripping the planet of its resources. At the Pentagon, the war room was in free fall. "DC is gone!" a technician screamed, voice raw with disbelief. "Not destroyed, gone. There's nothing left. No debris, no radiation, no bodies, nothing." Hayes gritted his teeth, his mind working faster than it ever had before. The aliens didn't just erase the people in Washington. They erased the city as if it had never existed. No wreckage, no ruins, just empty earth where the Capitol once stood. General Peterson slammed his fist against the table. "I want every military branch ready to fire. We hit them with everything we've got. Orbital strikes, cyber warfare, biochemical." "That won't work," Hayes interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. The war room went silent. "You saw what happened. They didn't just survive the missile, they ignored it. And when we attacked, they reacted like we were insects in their way. We're not at war. We're being discarded." Peterson's nostrils flared, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. The evidence was on every screen in the room. The aliens weren't attacking cities. They were culling populations with surgical precision. And now, they had erased Washington as if it were nothing more than an afterthought. "We need to change tactics," Hayes continued. "They don't see us as a threat. That's our only advantage. We need to figure out why they're doing this and how they're choosing who lives and who dies." Peterson exhaled through his nose, hands balled into fists. "And how the hell do we do that, Hayes?" "Walk up and ask them?" "No," Hayes said. "We observe them. The same way they're observing us." A tense silence followed. Then someone spoke up. "Sir," one of the intelligence officers said, his face pale. We might have a way." All eyes turned to him. He gulped but continued. "NORAD picked up a small anomaly about an hour before the arrival. It wasn't one of the ships. It was something else, a signal, a single frequency, buried beneath normal radiation levels. We thought it was just background noise at first, but it's identical to the energy signatures coming from the ships." "Where was the signal coming from?" Hayes asked. The analyst hesitated. "Antarctica." The room went silent again. Antarctica, one of the last untouched frontiers of Earth. No major cities, no significant military presence, just ice, isolation, and whatever secrets had been buried there for millennia. Hayes and Peterson locked eyes. It was their only lead. Peterson exhaled sharply and turned to his officers. "Get me a task force. Black Ops only. No comms, no electronic signals. If we're going in cold." Hayes nodded. He was already running through the possibilities in his head. If the signal was tied to the ships, it could be their first real chance to understand the enemy. Maybe even their only chance. because if humanity didn't figure out what was happening soon, there wouldn't be anyone left to fight back. The flight to Antarctica was as quiet as the skies themselves. Hayes sat in the cargo hold of the stealth transport, surrounded by a team of 12 elite operatives. No insignia, no names, just trained ghosts, moving without a trace. Outside, the world had gone deathly still. Major cities were abandoned, their streets filled with the fallen. The alien ships hung over them, unmoving, silent. The selection process continued, and no one knew how long it would last. The pilot's voice crackled in his earpiece. 2 minutes out. Hayes glanced at the team. Weapons check. Remember, if these things can erase cities, our firepower is worthless. We're here to gather intel, not pick a fight. The soldiers nodded. They all knew what was at stake. As they broke through the Antarctic storm, the landscape came into view. A barren wasteland of ice and snow. But in the middle of the frozen nothingness, something stood out. A structure. It wasn't alien. It wasn't human either. It was old. Massive, dark stone jutted from the ice, arranged in unnatural formations. Some of the slabs had collapsed. Others remained standing. It looked like ruins, but ruins of what? Then the scanner pinged. The same energy signature as the alien ships. Hayes felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Touchdown in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. Hayes tightened his grip on his rifle. They had come looking for answers, but some answers were better left undiscovered. The transport touched down on the ice with a muffled thud, the landing as smooth and silent as the world around them. Even the storm seemed hesitant to make noise, the wind howling just faintly enough to remind them that they weren't alone. Hayes unstrapped his harness and stood. The rest of the team was already moving, their training evident in the seamless efficiency of their actions. No wasted movements, no hesitation. They knew the stakes. The moment the ramp lowered, the cold slammed into them like a physical force. The temperature was lethal, negative 60 degrees at least, but their thermal suits kept them functional. They moved in a tight formation, rifles at the ready, eyes scanning the ruins ahead. Up close, the structures were even more unsettling. The dark stone formations weren't natural. They were placed, designed. Massive slabs jutted out of the ice at odd angles, some still half buried, others towering overhead like the ribcage of some long-dead beast. Strange, intricate carvings ran along the surfaces, worn down by time, but still distinct. And then there was the signal. Picking up a strong frequency, one of the team members muttered, checking his scanner. Same as the ships, it's coming from below us. Hayes nodded. He had expected that. There's got to be an entrance somewhere. Spread out. Look for anything that resembles a passage. The team fanned out, their boots crunching softly against the ice. The ruins weren't just old. They were ancient. Hayes could feel it in his bones. This place had been buried for eons, hidden beneath Antarctica's frozen grip. But the question was, who built it? And why was it emitting the same energy signature as the alien ships? Over here! One of the soldiers, Calloway, waved them over to a massive, partially collapsed archway. The ice had cracked around it, revealing a dark tunnel leading deep underground. A cold draft whispered out, sending a chill through Hayes' spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. This is it, Calloway said. Looks man-made. Not man-made, another soldier corrected. Something made. Hayes took point, leading them inside. The walls were smooth, unnaturally so, like they had been carved with precision far beyond human capability. The deeper they went, the more intricate the carvings became. Strange symbols, patterns that didn't belong to any known language. They weren't random. They had meaning. Then the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The moment Hayes stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. The room was massive, the ceiling vanishing into darkness above them. Strange, obelisk-like structures dotted the space, some intact, others shattered into pieces. But at the center of it all was the source of the signal, a machine. It was massive, embedded into the very rock itself, pulsating with a faint, eerie glow. And it was alive. The team froze. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Hayes stepped forward cautiously. The machine wasn't just running. It was broadcasting. "Sir," Calloway whispered, "this thing's doing something." Hayes pulled out a small scanner and pointed it at the machine. The readings were off the charts, but something else stood out, a data stream. "It's sending a message," he murmured. "To the ships?" Hayes shook his head. His pulse quickened as he deciphered the data. It wasn't being sent to the alien ships above. It was being sent outward, beyond Earth, beyond the solar system. It was calling for something else, and something was calling back. Then, the machine's glow intensified. The signal changed, and the ruins around them started to shake. The tremors started as a low vibration beneath their feet, subtle but unmistakable. Dust and ice shook loose from the cavern's ceiling, drifting down like snow in the dim, eerie glow of the machine. The pulsating hum grew louder, more insistent. "Sir, we need to pull back," Calloway said, gripping his rifle tighter. "Whatever this thing is, it's waking up." Hayes didn't respond immediately. His eyes were locked on the machine, on the shifting patterns of light running along its surface. It wasn't just broadcasting. It was responding. But to what? A cold realization crept into his mind. The alien ships had come in silence, selecting their chosen and erasing the rest. They had judged humanity as unworthy. But this machine, it was older than them. It had been here long before humanity even existed. And it was still transmitting, which meant the ships hadn't come here on their own. They had been summoned. "Move," Hayes barked, snapping out of his trance. "We need to get out of here now." The team didn't hesitate. They turned, moving quickly back toward the tunnel entrance, but the ground lurched violently beneath them. A deep, mechanical groan echoed through the chamber, as if the machine itself were alive and in pain. The walls cracked, and suddenly, the tunnel behind them collapsed in an explosion of ice and stone. They were trapped. Shit, Calloway swore, spinning around. "Alternative exit?" "None," another soldier said grimly. "That was our way out." Hayes' mind raced. They were underground, in an alien ruin, and a machine older than civilization itself was waking up. Above them, the ships were still watching, still waiting, and now they had no escape. He turned back to the machine. If it had the power to send a signal beyond the stars, maybe, just maybe, it had the power to do something else. "Cover me," Hayes ordered. He stepped toward the machine, ignoring the instinctual fear crawling up his spine. Up close, the carvings looked almost organic, like veins running across the surface. He hesitated only a second before reaching out and placing his gloved hand against it. The reaction was immediate. A shockwave of energy blasted outward, knocking the entire team to the ground. A bright flash erupted from the machine's core, flooding the chamber with light. For a moment, Hayes was weightless, adrift in something vast and incomprehensible. Then the visions came. A planet, vast and cold, its surface a graveyard of cities long abandoned. Towering figures, wrapped in obsidian armor, watching from shadows that stretched beyond the stars. A war, ancient and endless, fought between things that should not exist. And then, Earth, humanity. A species that wasn't supposed to be here, a species that was never meant to evolve. a species that had been left behind when the true rulers of this world had vanished. Hayes gasped, stumbling back. The visions vanished, but the truth remained burned into his mind. "We're not the first," he whispered. The team stared at him, confused, but there was no time to explain. The machine's hum had reached a fever pitch, and Hayes knew without a doubt, that the alien ships had felt it. The ground above them cracked. Something massive was coming. And this time, the silence would not be their warning. The ice split apart with a deafening crack, a jagged rupture tearing through the ceiling above them. Dust and frozen shards rained down, forcing Hayes and his team to shield their faces as the ground trembled beneath them. The machine's glow intensified, pulsing like a beating heart, each pulse sending shockwaves through the cavern. Then, from the widening fissure above, they descended. Dark, skeletal figures drifted downward, moving with an unnatural grace. Their bodies were elongated, their limbs too thin, too sharp. Their skin, or whatever passed for it, was smooth and black, as if carved from obsidian. Their heads were featureless, save for deep-set hollows where eyes should have been. They made no sound, not even the whisper of movement. The same silence that had heralded the arrival now filled the cavern. The first of the creatures touched the ground, its long fingers curling into the stone. Hayes raised his rifle instinctively, but he already knew. Bullets wouldn't matter. Nothing they carried would matter. Calloway aimed as well. "Orders," he hissed, voice tight with panic. Hayes didn't answer. His mind was racing, piecing together the nightmare puzzle that had been unfolding since the ships arrived. The vision the machine had shown him wasn't just history, it was a warning. This planet had belonged to something else long before humanity ever crawled from the oceans. And now, those things, whatever had ruled before, had returned. The aliens weren't invaders, they were custodians, and humanity had been judged as trespassers. The nearest creature took a slow step forward, its hollow eyes fixed on Hayes. It didn't raise a weapon, it didn't threaten, it only watched. No, examined, evaluating. A terrible certainty settled in Hayes's gut. They weren't here to kill. Not yet. They were here to make a decision, just like before. He lowered his rifle. "Don't fire." Calloway stiffened. "Sir, what?" "They're not attacking. They erased an entire goddamn city." Hayes didn't take his eyes off the creatures. "Because we attacked first." The cavern trembled again. The machine pulsed, responding to the silent entities before it. Hayes realized with a sickening clarity that this moment, this exact moment, was another test. Another silent judgment. If they fired, they wouldn't be fighting a battle. They would be proving their own unworthiness. One of the creatures raised a single clawed hand. A soft ripple of energy shimmered in the air. A question. Hayes took a slow breath, then, against every instinct screaming at him, he stepped forward. The ripple intensified. The creature tilted its head, almost curious. Hayes's heart pounded. He could feel the weight of the moment crushing him. The survival of his team, maybe the survival of everyone left, depended on what he did next. So he did the only thing he could. He raised his own hand and touched the ripple. The world exploded. A surge of foreign thoughts, too vast and too alien to comprehend, flooded into his mind. Images, memories that weren't his, poured into him, burning like fire. A species older than time, a war between forces so vast that entire galaxies had been collateral damage. A singular law etched into the very fabric of the universe. Only the strong survive. Hayes staggered back, gasping, his vision blurring. He felt like his mind had been dipped into something infinite, something impossible. The creature watching him tilted its head again. And then, for the first time, a sound broke the silence. A single word. Prove. The ground trembled one last time, and then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the creatures vanished. The machine shut down, and the alien ships above began to move. For the first time since the arrival, they weren't harvesting. They were waiting for humanity to make its choice. And Hayes understood. The test wasn't over. It had just begun. The tremors subsided, leaving only a deep, eerie stillness in the cavern. The machine had gone dark, its pulsing energy extinguished. The alien figures were gone, as if they had never been there. But Hayes knew better. They weren't gone. They were watching. The weight of the words still rang in his skull. Prove. "What the hell was that?" Calloway hissed, still gripping his rifle, his knuckles white. Hayes took a shaky breath, trying to steady himself. "A message." Calloway gave him a sharp look. "A message? That's what you call that?" He gestured to the cavern, to the dark, silent monolith that had just tried to rewrite the inside of Hayes' skull. "We're standing inside an alien ruin, talking about species-old wars, and you think this is just a message?" "It's worse than that," Hayes murmured. He turned back to the machine, still feeling the phantom weight of the visions it had forced into his mind. "They're testing us. Always have been." Another soldier stepped forward. Corporal West, one of the quieter ones. "Testing us for what?" Hayes didn't answer immediately. The thoughts swirling in his mind weren't his own. He felt like he had glimpsed something too massive to truly comprehend, like standing at the edge of a black hole, knowing it could consume everything with a single misstep. Only the strong survive. It wasn't a war doctrine. It wasn't a strategy. It was a law. The alien ships hadn't come to exterminate humanity out of hatred or conquest. They had come because they had the right to, because something in the universe had given them the authority to decide who was worthy of existence, and they had judged humanity as insufficient. "We need to go," Hayes finally said, voice steady. "Right now." "But we're trapped." Hayes turned back toward the collapsed entrance, his pulse still hammering. He didn't know how he knew, but something in his gut told him. They weren't trapped anymore. They were allowed to leave. "Try the signal," he ordered. "See if we can contact the transport." West hesitated, then tapped his wrist comm. "Raven 1, do you copy?" A moment of static. Then, "Raven 1, this is Control. What's your status?" The entire team froze. That voice wasn't their pilot. It was coming from Washington, D.C., the city that had been erased. Hayes' blood ran cold. He grabbed the comm from West's hand. "Who is this?" A brief pause. Then the voice came again. "You are out of time." The cavern exploded. A shockwave of pure force hurled Hayes and his team backward. The walls cracked, ice splitting apart as the machine behind them surged back to life. But this time it wasn't broadcasting a message. It was activating something. Hayes hit the ground hard, his vision swimming. Alarms blared in his helmet, his suit compensating for the sudden atmospheric pressure shift. A deep, reverberating hum filled the cavern, vibrating through his bones. Calloway scrambled to his feet, his expression wild. "We need to go, now!" The ground beneath them shifted, and then they were falling. The ice gave way, the cavern collapsing beneath them, swallowing them into the darkness below. And in the last seconds before the abyss took them, Hayes heard it again. A whisper, a command. Prove. And then there was nothing but darkness. The fall felt endless. Darkness swallowed them whole as they plunged into the abyss, their bodies twisting in freefall. Wind howled past Hayes' ears, but it wasn't natural wind. It carried a sound, something just beneath the range of human hearing. A whisper, a pulse, a voice that didn't use words. The team's suits adjusted, micro-thrusters kicking in to slow their descent, but the void stretched on and on. Hayes caught flashes of movement around him, West flailing to stabilize himself, Calloway reaching for a handhold that didn't exist, the others swallowed in the black. Then, light. It wasn't bright. It was a dull, pulsing glow from far below. Alien, unnatural, the same light the machine had emitted before it activated. It was coming up fast. Hayes barely had time to brace before impact. His boots hit solid ground with a bone-jarring thud. His knees buckled, the shock absorption in his suit keeping his legs from breaking. Around him, the rest of the team crashed down one by one, rolling, grunting in pain. "Everyone check in," Hayes rasped, shaking his head to clear it. His helmet's HUD flickered, struggling to adjust to the dim light. "West here," a voice crackled. "Still breathing." "Calloway," another groaned. "Barely." One by one, the others reported in. No casualties, just bruises and confusion. Hayes exhaled in relief, but it was short-lived, because they were not alone. The chamber they had fallen into was vast, stretching out beyond the reach of their helmet lights. The pulsing glow came from massive structures, towers of black stone and metal, arranged in a circular formation like a ritual site. They hummed with energy, the air thick with an electric charge. And standing between those towers, watching them with hollow, glowing eyes, were hundreds of the creatures. Hayes froze. They weren't moving. They weren't attacking. They were waiting. Calloway took a shaky step back. "Tell me we're not about to die." Hayes didn't answer. His mind was spinning. The vision, the machine, the message, the test. Prove. This wasn't an execution. This was a trial. The realization sent a cold wave of understanding through him. The aliens had never planned to simply wipe out humanity. They had been choosing, selecting who lived and who vanished, not as extermination, but as correction. Humanity, in their eyes, had failed. And now, Hayes and his team had been brought here, not to be killed, but to be judged. The closest creature took a slow step forward, tilting its head in that unsettling, predatory way. Its voice, if it could even be called that, was layered, deep, vibrating in the air like a ripple in reality itself. "One among you must speak." The team tensed. Calloway's breath hitched. "What the hell does that mean?" Hayes knew. He felt it. The same way he had felt the machine calling to him. The same way the silence of the ships had pressed into his mind. He had already been touched by the vision. The choice was already made. He stepped forward. The creature's eyes burned brighter. The others around it shifted, their heads turning in unison. Watching. Measuring. Hayes swallowed hard. "I'm listening." The creature exhaled a sound that wasn't quite laughter. "Then you will see." And the world vanished in light. Hayes was somewhere else, not in the chamber, not on Earth, not anywhere. He was floating in a sea of stars, a vast emptiness stretching in all directions. But it wasn't empty. He could feel them. The architects, the silent watchers, the first rulers of Earth. They weren't alive in any human sense. They weren't dead either. They had evolved beyond time, beyond space, beyond the limits of flesh and thought. And they had been waiting. Waiting for the next species to rise. Waiting for something worthy. Hayes saw flashes of civilizations before humanity, races that had come and gone, each wiped clean from the galaxy when they had failed to meet the architect's expectations. Now, it was Earth's turn, and they were failing. The ships weren't here to conquer. They were here to decide. Humanity had been judged as weak, fractured, undeserving of the power they wielded. Their wars, their greed, their inability to unite, These things had marked them as inferior. And yet, the architects had not erased them completely, because there was still a choice to be made. Hayes felt something pressing into his mind, something vast and incomprehensible. A challenge, a demand, a single final question. Will you fight for your place? And Hayes knew this was it, the final test. If humanity proved itself, they would be allowed to remain. If they failed, they would be erased, not in fire, not in war, in silence. He took a deep breath, and then, with every ounce of defiance he had left, he answered. Yes. The stars shattered, and Hayes woke up, back in the chamber, back in his body, back on Earth. The creatures were still there, still waiting. But something had changed. The silence had shifted. The judgment was not over. But for the first time, humanity had been given a chance. Now they had to prove they were worthy of it. The silence in the chamber felt different now. Not empty, not indifferent, but expectant. Hayes staggered to his feet, his breath coming in sharp gasps. His body still felt disconnected, as if part of him had remained in that void between the stars. But he was here. He was alive, and they were still watching. The creatures, hundreds of them, stood motionless around the glowing towers, their hollow eyes burning into him. He could feel the weight of their gaze, of their judgment. His team was still frozen in place, their weapons useless in their hands, staring at him like he had just spoken to God. Maybe he had. Calloway finally found his voice. What the hell just happened? Hayes swallowed. How could he explain it? How could he put into words the immensity of what he had just experienced? The weight of 1 billion years of history pressing down on humanity like a vice. He turned to face the creatures. His heart pounded in his chest. He knew what came next. They had given him a choice. Now they needed an answer. Hayes straightened. You asked if we would fight for our place. His voice echoed in the cavern, steadier than he felt. I gave you my answer. The lead creature took a step forward, tilting its head. Words are insufficient. The ground trembled. The towers pulsed brighter, casting long, jagged shadows across the chamber. A shift in the air sent a chill down Hayes' spine. You must prove. Calloway stiffened. Prove? How? As if in response, the cavern around them shifted. The floor cracked, deep fissures spreading outward in all directions. The towers pulsed in perfect rhythm, and then, suddenly, 3 massive doorways materialized in the stone walls. Each led into darkness, the void beyond impenetrable. The creatures stepped aside, revealing the paths. Hayes already knew what they were. Trials. One of the creatures finally spoke again, its voice reverberating in his skull. 3 paths, 3 challenges, 1 final test. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Hayes clenched his fists. We were never going to get an easy way out. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. Tell me what we're facing. The creature's hollow eyes locked onto him. The test of mind. It gestured toward the leftmost path, a cold tunnel lined with strange, shifting symbols. The test of body. It motioned toward the middle, where a jagged corridor pulsed with raw, violent energy. The test of unity. The final doorway loomed ahead, its entrance a swirling vortex of shadow. Hayes could feel it. These weren't simple tasks. They were meant to break them, and if they failed, humanity failed with them. Shit, Calloway muttered, staring at the 3 paths. This is some real ancient apocalypse bullshit. Hayes forced a grim smile. You wanted proof of what we're up against? Here it is. He turned back to the creatures. And if we pass? The lead figure's hollow eyes flickered. Then your species will be permitted to fight for its survival. Hayes frowned. Fight? Against who? The creature simply turned and vanished into the darkness. The others followed. And just like that, the Watchers were gone. All that remained were the 3 doorways, 3 trials, and a single unspoken truth. The test had already begun. Hayes turned to his team. We don't have a choice. He pointed at the paths. We split up, 3 teams. We take on the trials, and we win. Calloway exhaled sharply. And if we don't? Hayes met his gaze. Then humanity dies. No one argued, because they all knew it was true. Without another word, the team broke apart and stepped into the darkness. Hayes stepped into the darkness, the weight of humanity pressing on his shoulders. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world around him shifted. No longer the cold, silent cavern, but something deeper, something vast. The 3 teams had each taken a different path, and now their fates, and the fate of their entire species, rested on the trials they faced. West's team entered a space that wasn't a space at all. It was a void, infinite and endless, but filled with whispers, thoughts that weren't theirs, images of worlds long dead, civilizations that had stood where humanity now stood, and fallen. The architects had seen them all, judged them all. A simple challenge: prove that humanity could learn. Memories were stripped from them, identities blurred, until all that remained were raw instinct and knowledge. They had to piece themselves back together to prove that their minds were more than just temporary vessels, that they could grow, adapt, become something more. When West finally gasped back into consciousness, the trial chamber around him dissolved, and he stood at the exit. His team had survived. They had passed. Calloway's team faced something simpler, brutal, honest, a battlefield. They were dropped into a war that was already lost, human cities burning, soldiers screaming, alien ships blotting out the sky. It wasn't real, but it felt real. The pain, the exhaustion, the never-ending waves of enemies that adapted to every move they made. A simple challenge: prove that humanity could endure. They fought until their bones ached, until their weapons failed, until their very bodies refused to move. But they still stood, still clawed their way forward, still refused to die. When Calloway collapsed at the foot of the exit, the battlefield vanished, and he knew they had passed. Hayes walked alone into the void. But he wasn't alone for long. The darkness shifted, and suddenly he stood in a room filled with them. Leaders, presidents, generals, dictators, rebels, the greatest figures of human history, and the worst. A simple challenge: prove that humanity could stand together. One by one, he was forced to confront them, their choices, their mistakes, their triumphs, their failures. He saw wars fought over greed, power, pride. He saw unity shattered time and time again, but he also saw hope. The moments where humanity rose above its worst instincts, the sacrifices made for the greater good, the times when people put aside their differences, not because they had to, but because they chose to. When he finally reached the end, the shadows of history faded, and the doorway appeared before him. He had passed. The verdict. The 3 teams emerged at the same time, their bodies aching, their minds torn apart and reforged. The cavern had changed. The glowing towers pulsed with a steady rhythm. The creatures, the architects, had returned, waiting, watching. Hayes stood before them, breathing hard. He didn't need to speak. The trials had spoken for them, and then, for the first time, the silence broke. A single layered voice. "You are flawed." The words hit like a hammer, the weight of their failures, their history, their mistakes. They were undeniable. But then, the voice spoke again. "But you are not broken." A pause, a shift in the air. You are permitted to fight. The meaning was clear. They had not won. They had not been granted acceptance, nor were they considered equals. But they had been given a chance. The alien ships that had once hovered in judgment now moved with purpose. The selection process had ended. The harvest was over. And humanity had been granted the one thing it needed most: a future. A war was coming, not for survival, but for the right to exist. And this time, humanity would not face it in silence. They would rise, they would fight, and they would prove them wrong.